There's a pattern you start to notice if you watch enough revenge movies across different decades. The violence changes, the tone changes, even the endings change, but the anger stays the same. From grindhouse shockers to neon lit thrillers to whatever strange genre blending survival nightmare we're about to get with Send Help, feminist revenge films don't just tell stories about individuals, they tell stories about the moment they were made in. If you really want to understand why these movies hit so hard, you don't just look at the characters, you look at the world that created them. Back in the 1970s, that world was loud with change and completely unprepared to deal with it. Second wave feminism was pushing into public consciousness with demands for bodily autonomy, workplace equality, and basic recognition of women's lived experiences. And cinema responded in the strangest, most uncomfortable way possible. Films like I Spit on Your Grave and Ms. 45 didn't feel like empowerment in the modern sense. They felt raw, jagged, and often deeply unsettling. These were movies that forced audiences to sit with brutality and then flipped the script by allowing their protagonists to retaliate with equal or greater force. But they were also marketed for shock, not justice, which creates a tension that still lingers over the genre. Are these films reclaiming power, or are they exploiting trauma for entertainment? The honest answer is both. They functioned less as clean feminist statements and more as cultural pressure valves, a way for a society that didn't yet have the language for female rage to express it in the most extreme terms possible. By the time the 1990s rolled around, that rage hadn't disappeared, but it had evolved. It had found structure, tone, and, most importantly, context. Thelma and Louise doesn't feel like a grindhouse revenge story because it isn't trying to shock you into submission. It's trying to make you understand something. The film reframes revenge as escape, not just retaliation. It's not about punishing a single villain, it's about breaking free from a system that quietly suffocates. The anger is still there, but it's paired with a kind of tragic awareness. Even when the characters seize control, the world around them hasn't changed. The ending doesn't offer victory in the traditional sense, it offers defiance. That shift reflects a decade where opportunities for women were expanding, but the underlying structures still felt immovable. Revenge in that context becomes less about destruction and more about refusing to be contained. Then the 2000s arrive and do something unexpected. They take that anger and turn it into spectacle, into myth, into something almost operatic. With Quentin Tarantino and Kill Bill, Volume 1 and Kill Bill Volume 2, the genre undergoes a transformation. The brutality of earlier films is still there, but it's filtered through stylization, through genre homage, through a cinematic language that draws from samurai films, kung fu epics, and westerns. The bride isn't just a victim seeking justice, she's a legend in motion, a character who moves through her story like a force of nature. The trauma that sets her journey in motion matters, but it's no longer the centerpiece. The revenge is. That shift mirrors a broader cultural moment where women in media were beginning to occupy roles traditionally reserved for men, not just participating in narratives of power, but commanding them. Revenge becomes less about surviving injustice and more about dominating it, about rewriting the rules of who gets to be the hero in a story built on violence. That sense of empowerment starts to get interrogated. The cultural landscape shifts again, shaped by conversations around systemic injustice, accountability, and the long overdue exposure of institutional failures. Films like Promising Young Woman and Revenge refuse to let the audience sit comfortably in the fantasy. They don't just ask whether revenge is justified, they ask what it costs, They ask who it implicates. They complicate the idea of catharsis by making it feel incomplete or even hollow. Even something like Gone Girl turns the concept inside out, presenting a version of revenge that is calculated, manipulative, and deeply unsettling. The Avenger is no longer automatically the hero. The narrative itself becomes suspect. These films aren't interested in delivering clean emotional release. They're interested in examining the machinery behind it, the social conditions that make revenge feel necessary in the first place. And now we arrive at the present moment, where the genre is starting to blur into others entirely. The idea of revenge is no longer confined to a single structure or tone. It merges with horror, with survival stories, with psychological thrillers. Send Help represents this shift, even at a conceptual level. It's not just about retaliation against a person, it's about surviving a situation, navigating power imbalances, enduring isolation, and potentially turning that endurance into something else. Like getting the enemy isn't always a singular villain anymore. Sometimes it's the environment, the system, the circumstances that trap you in the first place. That reflects a very modern anxiety, the sense that injustice isn't always something you can defeat with a single act. Sometimes it's something you have to outlast, outthink, or escape entirely. What ties all of these films together isn't just the act of revenge, it's the way each era redefines what revenge means. In the 1970s, it was raw expression, a scream without a vocabulary. In the 1990s, it became escape, a refusal to accept confinement. In the 2000s, it transformed into myth, a stylized reclaiming of power. In the 2010s, it turned inward, questioning itself, exposing its own limitations and consequences. And now it's evolving again into something more diffuse, more complex, less about a single act, and more about navigating systems that are harder to confront directly. That's why these films hit so hard. Not because they celebrate violence and not because they offer easy answers, but because they tap into something deeper and more uncomfortable. They reflect how a culture processes injustice at any given moment. They show what it feels like to lose control, to take it back, and sometimes to realize that taking it back doesn't fix everything. When you watch Kill Bill Volume 1 or Promising Young Woman, you're not just watching a story about revenge. You're watching a snapshot of a society trying to figure out what justice looks like and failing in ways that are revealing, complicated, and sometimes disturbingly honest. And maybe that's the real reason these movies stay with us, because they don't just ask what someone would do in the face of injustice. They ask what kind of world makes that response feel necessary. And every decade answers that question a little differently, whether we're ready to hear it or not.